Uh, that's the Irish diaspora. America has almost 40 million Irish people, or people who can claim Irish descent. Australia, Canada, Argentina, Mexico, Poland. We have a Countess Markovic.
Yes.
She was Polish, and there was another gentleman, I can't remember his name. But so we've links to every country in Europe. The Flight of the Wild Geese, I don't know if you've ever heard of that. So we fought
Great
for
Britain, of course, you did that.
Yes, absolutely.
Well.
There's 12.5 million Irish people, or descendants of Irish people living in Britain, in the UK. So we have to be very mindful that as the history develops and goes on and goes forward, that all of these people were driven from this country.
Yes.
They never got the opportunity to live here. I suppose it'd be like we say Polish people who went to New York in the 1920s.
Oh, like we've been doing the immigration thing for last 200 years, like
Yes.
every major uprising or any other calamity, we were first going in France and then, overseas, and this kind of recent immigration is just the last kind of, point in a very long history.
But isn't it very sad that we as nations, we don't use the same model? We'll say, for example, and I don't want to get into any particular country, but let's say the model that the Israelis use. Now they have their own issues, in the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's their issue. I'm not going to get into that issue. We have enough problems of our own to try and deal with, right? So, and there's plenty of them to solve their problems. But the Israelis have a policy in relation to, we'll say, Jewish people. So you can be a Jew from anywhere in the world, and if you want to become an Israeli citizen, then they will help you come to Israel and become a citizen, and you become part of their economy and part of their society. And countries like your country, Poland, and this country, we don't have those policies. We've just literally forgotten our people and said, you're no good. And the work that our people have done in America and in other countries like wherever,
it's enormous.
Is huge. Massive. The demographics themselves, they're extraordinarily wealthy. They're very high up in politics. And that's an asset that we don't use to further our own society. But we allow those people to come back here and avoid paying tax.
So I just wanted to get a little bit into how do you see actually certain demands to, what's the chance of implementing them, because it sounds like a very tough fight, and maybe it would require someone actually, I don't know, winning the elections or something to, for instance, correct that change that happened to division of powers, when Taoiseach now is a main figure and pretty much decides about a lot of things, right? So what's the tool, what's the mechanism to do it?
The way I look at it like this, the analogy I like to use is that in 1940, the beginning of the 20th century, 1900 to 1916, people asked the same question: how is Ireland going to go from being an occupied nation to a free nation? And everybody said it was too hard. And thousands of men volunteered to become part of various different groups, and those groups then united under one banner. And then we had the 1916 Rising, which sadly failed. However, even though that particular rising failed, it did spur on a new generation of people who fought for the freedom of Ireland, and then we, over the next coming decades, we more or less got that freedom. So the same thing applies. Back then, at the very beginning, they would have said, how are we going to do this? This is kind of impossible. Nothing's impossible. If the will is there, if the will of the people is there, then it can be changed. So how do you start it? Well, you can essentially form a unity government So getting 82 people elected in Dáil Éireann, which is a unity government. And that unity government could roll out the 25 demands that are on our list. And essentially anybody who reads the 25 demands, they're not that difficult to actually roll out. And that gives everybody a bit of a level playing field. It enriches some people, but it raises people out of poverty. It takes away the corruption, it brings in accountability, and it also brings back in the referendum and the citizens initiated
The accountability, is it not that the people in power now would be very much afraid of that kind of move, because that's going to be really dangerous for them?
We're not asking the people in power to support us. We're asking the people of Ireland to support us. And there's 5 million of us.
Okay.
So
essentially grassroots movement,
absolutely,
something from down up, enforcing those demands and actually see them through.
But if, as I said, if a unity government went in there for 1 year, they could essentially roll out all those 25 demands in 1 year, and then go back to the people and ask the people.
So that would be something like a group of people from that grassroots movement, essentially. Okay. I did actually hear somebody talking about the unity government. I think before this government, created a coalition, but of course it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Nope.
But hopefully it will. Yes.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
The Yellow Vest movement is not a political movement. We're apolitical.
Exactly.
We don't side with any party.
Yes.
And every party that's there at the moment, we will challenge them if they do something wrong.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Green Party, Sinn Féin, People for Profit, Solidarity, or whoever, Labour Party, Renua, Antua, etc., 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 etc. The thing is that the politics in Ireland is broken. Right? There's no accountability.
Yes.
A politician can be corrupt and be re-elected. He can serve time in prison and be re-elected. And we have various examples of those individuals, right?
Yeah, because for instance we have this cervical cancer, situation, and then the same people were just recently, in power, running the show pretty much. So that should be
and awarded the keys of the city. So they were not held responsible for the deaths of women who've died and women who were dying, and criminally.
Yes.
That whole thing was criminally. People were promoted. People were given better jobs, higher pay, and golden handshakes, and the freedom of the city.
How is it that people do not see it? Because that's been
Short
quite,
memories. Short memories. Again, it boils back down to personal responsibility. So what we do as a people is we keep reinforcing the rhetoric that we can't do anything about it. But we can. Of course we can. And if we can change the mindset of the Irish public, then the Irish public themselves will find the will and the courage to stand up and fight back.
Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about one particular point, this prohibition on TDs from being housing landlords and beneficiaries? What's the background for this one?
Well, a lot of the TDs that are in Leinster House are landlords, big landlords.
Yeah, I've heard.
They own lots of properties, and they're benefiting from
regulations.
Right now we have a huge housing issue.
Yes.
So we don't basically have enough, whether we have enough houses or that we don't have enough houses, or we're just not giving the houses, or whatever, it's complicated again. But a lot of these guys are benefiting by these new HAP schemes.
What's that?
So the HAP scheme is basically if you're eligible for social housing, because there are no social housing and the government hasn't built any social housing over the last 20 years, that's part of the policy, driven by these landlords, you then are forced into a situation where you have to rent privately and apply to the state then for subsistence, and the state then will pay you up to 80% of your rent, which goes to the landlord, and the landlord is the local TD. And he's the guy creating the policy.
So you're suggesting that this kind of slowness in building the social housing, it pretty much comes from the fact that there's too many people, benefiting from the
with a vested interest.
Status quo.
Yeah, with a vested interest. I suppose it'd be like if I was take for example, if I was personally invested in the pharmaceutical industry, okay, and I had a company that manufactured vaccines, for example, right? That it would be in my interest to push an agenda where everybody in this country has to have a mandatory vaccine with no choice.
Yeah.
So the idea here then would be, so I'm the TD and I'm pushing out the policy, and the policy that I'm pushing out represents my agenda, not for the greater good, not to protect the freedom of choice, not to protect the freedom of your body autonomy. It's about my agenda and forcing you into a situation that you have to accept my agenda, or be called names, or be denigrated by society and called a lunatic and a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist and all of this sort of stuff. Now, obviously, I don't have any shares or anything in. I'm just using it as an example,
yes.
But the same example can be applied to the building industry. So a lot of TDs are, former construction companies, finance. TDs are into finance, housing. So there's all vested interests. Who decides that they get to go forward to be a TD in the first place?
What with the Return Islands oil and gas reserves to public ownership? What's that about?
So, more recently, in the last 20 years, Ireland has become one of the countries that has found huge gas and oil reserves on its coastlines, and we have been tapping into those things. And one of the biggest scandals in this country is that we have more or less given away those gas and oil reserves for free to other countries, for free, and that we will not benefit.
How comes? How does that work?
Because essentially somebody got a brown envelope somewhere down along the lines and decided that it was a good idea for his vested interest to get this company the mineral rights to drill for oil, and that company is owned by another country.
In the sense, okay. So essentially foreign companies are pretty much using up those resources,
but they're mining those reserves.
Yeah, they're mining
and
them,
a part of the agreement to get them involved in it is that whatever costs that they outlay, they will be written off until they start to make a profit. But sure, those companies could decide that we're never going to make a profit. Those outlays are just going to be billions of euros every year, and sure, we're never going to have to pay a penny back.
Okay, so is there any company that is actually Irish owned, in that sector, or?
Yes, there's loads of them. There's actually loads of them.
Okay.
And they're down in Nigeria doing the same thing to the Nigerians.
Okay.
Right. So there's loads of examples. Yes, like recently the Irish government has banned fracking and the drilling of any more oil in Ireland, and yet shortly afterwards awarded new contracts to the Chinese off the coast of Kerry.
Well, you are very similar to the Polish situation. We have a very similar situation with our resources over there.
So by taking control of it, by taking it back, then we can decide. It's like, I'll give you an example. It's like potatoes. So traditionally potatoes are seen as an Irish thing, yeah? Okay, spuds. But we import most of the potatoes that we eat, and we export the potatoes that we grow, right? And most of the potatoes that we eat come from Egypt, and most of the potatoes that we export goes to England.
So is it some kind of, carousels that's supposed to, make everybody happy within European Union?
Well, it's all about international trade and stuff. Like we were a massive producer of butter. So when the Irish government set up a butter company, one of the main rules of that company, it's now called Kerrygold, was not to sell that butter in Ireland. That it was only for export. Right?
Okay, and what was supposed to be eaten in Ireland then?
Well, we'd go down to our local butcher shops. This is around the time when we had local butcher shops, and people would buy the local butter that would be in the butter in those shops. So it was about protecting the homegrown markets. But very, very quickly, with all the new businesses popping up all over the place, bigger supermarkets, larger supermarkets, supermarket chains, then all of that sort of, mom and pop, grassroots, cottage industries were just wiped out, And now Kerrygold now sells to the Irish market as well. It's a billion euro industry a year. Butter.
Oh, yeah. So you were talking as well about the abolishing household charge and property tax.
So that's the household charge property tax. So again, that's like double taxation. So double taxation is wrong. We're already paying a stamp duty on a property that you're buying, and now you have to pay another tax, which is the property tax, and a local council tax on top of that as well. So it's about abolishing that, because if you're buying your home, it's your home. You should own your home, and because we traditionally come from the landlord class, where Irish people weren't allowed to own property, so we had to. We were paying rents.
Yes.
So when it suited the landlords to throw us off our lands and off our properties in the middle of the 1800s, and which caused major problems in Ireland between coupled with the fact of an orchestrated Holocaust and mass migration to the United States, England, Canada, and Australia, has literally driven our population into the ground.
What's with the sweeping under the carpet this, in fact, the Holocaust that happened? Not really the famine, but the Holocaust that happened.
Well, it's kind of like a perfect storm. We all know what a perfect storm is. Like various events all line up, and it creates a perfect storm. So we had essentially the penal laws in Ireland, which most Irish people were subtenant farmers on tenant farmers' land. So we had small plots of land, and in those small plots we would grow potatoes. And the potato was essentially to feed us during the winter time. And then we would grow the grain and the corn, and that was to be sold for wages and to get by. So you only had a small plot, right? So that was fine. So around the same time then, the government in England passed a new law, which was known as the Fair Trade Law, which meant that farmers in Ireland, or the tenant farmer, not the subtenant farmer, was able to sell his produce, which the subtenant farmer was growing, for greater money outside of Ireland. Okay? So they were shipping tens of millions of tons of food out of Ireland, every day, every year. Meanwhile, the stocks of Irish supplies were dropping all the time, because they were getting more money on the open market by selling it to India or various companies, France and England and what have you. So and then coupled then with a couple of years of blight. So the blight hit the potatoes, and more or less killed the potatoes, which is what sustained the Irish people during the winters, because you wouldn't have
the other produce being sold off.
So people couldn't afford to buy the other produce because it was getting sold elsewhere. So essentially we ran out of food. But that was all policy. And rather than reverse the policy, they then brought in things like workhouses. So they built these workhouses and tossed all the people off the land, took their land from them, put them into the workhouses, fed them nothing, rampant disease, cholera, typhoid, and then when they realised that wasn't working, paid ship owners to export as many people as they could cram into a ship to America, Canada, Australia. The Dunbrody is down the road down here. It's one of those ships commonly known as the coffin ships. So they'd be overcrowded, and people would die, lots of people would die on the journey, which could have lasted anywhere from a month to 2 months.
Okay, so because from what I heard, and this is my impression, and I came across some time ago a book written by a gentleman, actually calling it a genocide. That's not really how it is being addressed kind of in the mainstream media. I think that's kind of the famine aspect is promoted, and all the rest is kind of swept under the carpet. Why do you think it is?
Here's the thing, right? So, take Second World War. During the Second World War, you had the concentration camps where millions of people were exterminated. And after the war, it was acknowledged that they were exterminated and killed. And reparations were then sought to, to the families of those who suffered. Some reparations. Imagine trying to give reparations to all of the Irish who were dispossessed of their lands, who were disinherited of their home and their country. There's an awful lot of us. There's 110 million Irish people all over the world. So how do you give reparations to that many people? So the English would have to pay the reparations because they're the ones who created the policy in the first place. So that would bankrupt England. So as the Fine Gael and the Fianna Fáil governments have pushed out this narrative over the generations over the last 100 years that it was a famine.
So it's
essentially, it was a famine,
yeah,
but it was an orchestrated famine.
Yes.
Just like in India, they did the same thing in India. They orchestrated a famine in India, and millions of people did. It was the crown, the English crown, and millions of people died as a result of it. And here as well, the population of Ireland in 1841 was 11.4 million people. Within 20 years, it was 3 million people.
So are you saying that the current, even with the immigration, the current level of the population in Ireland, it's kind of a direct effect of all those migrations and all those turmoils in the history, because because they clearly are capable of being 11 million, right? Even in the times that it's not so nice and not everybody is, well off and everything, right?
So take it like this, right? So England and Ireland are very similar countries, yeah? England has between 60 and 70 million people living there. Our population in Ireland has never really gotten over 4 to 5 million in 150 years. Now you would think that any population would grow.
Yes, of course.
So they have 70 million. They would have had a similar population to us 150 years ago. So they've now got 70. We still only have 5. So every year, year on year, no matter how many people are born here, we export just as many people away. So all of the highly educated people that we send to college and put huge investment into.
That must be an awful lot of people, because Ireland is known until now, it used to be like, you had 10 kids, 7 kids, whatever. Now, the average Irish person, from what I noticed, is like 3 kids. So it's still kind of, over
take my
the
family
two of parents.
Yeah.
So how is it that this is
take
not
my
growing?
family. My family, just as an example, I have 3 sisters living abroad.
Wow.
One in Spain, one in Australia, one in Canada. So that's the point here. So, and then I have 2 other siblings that live here. So there's 3 of us here and 3 of us abroad. So half of my family lives abroad in 3 different countries around the world. Now a lot of people say, "Oh, isn't that great? You get to experience the world, you get to travel, But in fairness, who wants that? Who doesn't want to be in their own country and have the ability to make a living and be successful in their own country and contribute to their own society, instead of having to go to Canada or to America? Now, 100 years ago, most of the Irish who were unskilled labourers, navvies, went to England, America to do building and construction work with the massive, But now it's a brain drain now, because majority of our graduates from colleges, so the scientists, the doctors, the new doctors, the nurses even. So nurses, even the most, I don't know what you would, the smallest of professions are leaving because it's a better quality of life elsewhere.
Yeah.
Less taxes, better quality of life, better standard of living.
Yeah.
And it's easier to make a living and easier to get ahead. Here, it's a problem.
Wow. So, just to finish it off, because It's a lot, really.
It is,
you know,
absolutely.
and
We could probably do
could
10
sit here
interviews.
till tomorrow talking about all those, items on the list, and it's a bit of a rabbit hole, each of them probably.
Well,
Overall, are you just hopeful? Do you see, the light at the end of a tunnel? Although
Well,
we are really now in the very dim kind of situation.
Okay, the first thing I would say is each of the demands for the LFS movement is something that the Yellow Vest movement, the supporters of the Yellow Vest movement decided were important. Okay? Now, there could be 5,000 other things put onto the list. Okay? But it represents all aspects of Irish society and all aspects of Irish politics. That's the first thing. The second thing is, am I hopeful? It started with one. And like any movement that grows, as long as it's growing, that's hope.
Yeah.
So our last protest saw several hundred, 1,000 plus people. And hopefully our next one will be just as large.
Or even larger.
Or even larger. And it's all about not just the Irish people.
Everybody lives here,
it's about every
in this
community.
sense, yes.
It's not just about Irish, it's about every community. Because essentially, here's the thing, is we're all equally being targeted by the broken promises, by the terribly bad policy. So each of us is struggling to survive more and more every day. That's going to get a hell of a lot harder going forward.
Yes.
So unless we start backing ourselves up, it doesn't matter whether you're Polish or Nigerian or Lithuanian and Latvian and English and whoever. It doesn't matter what you are. If you're living here, if you want to live here, that is, and if you want to continue living here and have a decent and successful life, or at least have the opportunity to have a decent and successful life, then you have to fight for it. You can't just sit back and say, yeah, that won't work.
And on this, positive note, we'll finish. Thanks very much for,
okay?
giving your time. Yes, it was lovely.
Yeah.
We will make probably some kind of, shorter cards out of it, and we'll write, a piece in our newspaper, and we'll send you obviously the link. Because I think people need to, get to know that movement.
Yeah.
Not to.
Funny enough, a lot of Polish people are joining the movement.
Yeah, I suppose we have a bit of a tradition, to eventually get our, bums up and do something. Maybe it's a little bit of a rebellious spirit in us as well. I'm seeing in myself.
Yeah, I actually feel at the moment that there's now in the last, we'd say, month, a huge swell of Polish support has come in, and they're coming out onto the streets. And I think that potentially the Polish in Ireland might actually drive the movement forward.
It would be lovely, but to be honest with you, I've met lovely Irish people that are, main part of, Health Freedom Island, for instance. That's really lovely ladies, and
lovely people, absolutely.
I absolutely adore them, and they are great, and they're doing so much work, behind the scenes. It's incredible how much, work hours going into the research and stuff, because they really want to be accurate, because it's very easy to target that subject and point out whatever. So they are brilliant, and so there's a lot of Irish people as well waking up, and that's a good thing. So if you can only contribute, that's only a positive thing. And I'm happy to be the part, because if I want to live here and see my kids being happy and going to a normal school and all the rest of it.
Well, here's the thing, right?
You need to kind of do something. I can't just ignore the problem.
So are you raising your kids only to export them to some other country?
No.
Because that's the future. I have 5 kids. That's their future.
To be honest with you, God knows where I would be exporting them now, because everywhere else is crazy. So
like as Irish